All right, we'll get started here in just a couple of minutes. We're going to let people get logged in. So if you're watching this offline, we may want to go ahead and fast forward, usually by the time we get everyone logged in and collect questions. So we'll by the time we get logged in and collect questions, it may be about 10 minutes. So if you want to if you're watching this offline, you may want to just fast forward a bit. So as we kind of collect questions and get other people logged in from around the world, we'll do that. And also for those people that are watching live, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us where you're from, we'll go ahead and start collecting information. And at that point, we'll get started in just a couple minutes. My name is Greg Ondo. I'll be presenting. I live outside Washington, D.C. area in the United States. And I'll be the host for the hangout today. I've been fortunate for a lot of the hangouts to have someone actually do an index of topics and questions that were covered that we could post with the hangout. That's always super helpful. So if anyone wants to kind of like take a meeting notes or hangout notes of different questions and topics, we'll be happy to go through those as well. But we'll go ahead and we see some people are getting logged in. We'll wait for people to get logged in, and then we'll start collecting questions and get started. So, all right. So you see Colin from Columbia, South Carolina. We have Israel. Bill Lord from Central Maryland. Lake Tahoe, Germany. We have Italy. We have Stanley from Poolsville, Maryland. I was up near there last week. All right. So we have from France in the house. Albert from New Jersey. Lake Tahoe. And once again, if you have questions, we had some people that had submitted questions in advance. If we have questions that you want covered, please feel free to enter that in the comments field, and I'll start taking notes on topics or questions that you guys want covered. With some more people logging in. All right, so we have people from Norway and Holland. So we got some questions on like the arpeggiator plugin, so we'll go over that. We had some questions on sidechaining. All right, good to see Taylor from Pine Grove, Pennsylvania. All right, 2 people from the Netherlands. So once again, if you're watching this offline, you may just want to fast forward as we're getting people logged in. Yeah, someone pretending that they're working in Ontario. That's great. And Berserkly. Charles Shorter from Fort Washington. It's It's right across the river from me. Another person from Holland. So 3 people from Holland checking in. We have Fresno, California. One other thing, if you want to send questions in advance for future Hangouts, you can always send them to clubcubase at steinberg.net. And then at that point, we could, if I need to prepare a project, we're able to do that as well. But we have some more people logging in. Again, if you have questions or topics that you want covered, please feel free to enter it in the comments field, and we'll get started here in a couple minutes. All right. So I think we have 4 people from the Netherlands. It's great. It's a beautiful country. All right. Our first person from Asia checking in from Thailand. Great. All right. So just copying over a couple questions that come in. Okay, so see a question. Good to see you, Greg, online. All right, just copying over some questions into my notepad. All right, still just did some housekeeping here. We have Hamburg, New Jersey. All right, so we have Edinburgh. I probably pronounced that incorrectly. See a question where I live in DC area. I grew up kind of in Dale City, Woodbridge, but I currently live in Old Town, Alexandria. All right. So yeah, I see a comment that someone who's at the Coast Recorders event in San Francisco. That's great. It's always great going out to see Michael's room. All right, still copying over some questions. Looks like I get some good questions. See question on new CC 121 soon. I haven't heard of. I haven't seen anything on a roadmap. So I'm seeing a question about, do I still present at Chuck Levin's, which is a store in the Washington, D.C. area? We still do our hangouts there every first Saturday of the month at 2 p.m. We just did one this past weekend. So the next one will be the first Saturday in October. All right, we'll see if there's any other quick questions that have come in. If not, we'll get started. So just last quick call, then we'll get started. And if you have comments or questions as we go along, please feel free to kind of chime in the comments field. We'll go ahead and get started. So one of the questions we had emailed in from David Reuter and Kristen Parisi, they do kind of a production company in Nashville, Big Tent, which does a lot of great stuff, was about how to use the MIDI arpeggio plugins. Okay, so let's say if we have an instrument sound here, kind of like we have our retro log open, and I have this sound. I want it to be a little more creative. Like, let's say, for instance, if I hold a chord down, it's not the most kind of interesting sound, but we could do some other interesting things just by taking, as modifying the MIDI information in real time. So if I wanted to, we can start off, there's two different arpeggiators. So there's Apache SX and Apache 5. So I think this was from maybe Cubase VST, kind of, 10 versions earlier, and then a more contemporary one. But we'll kind of give you an idea of what we can do. So what we can actually do is load this as a MIDI plugin. So we can load this as a MIDI insert. So when we come here, you'll see your inspector, and then for MIDI inserts, I can now just load up my Apache plugin. And this is an arpeggiator. And sometimes arpeggiators can get a bad rap, and people tend not to use them the most creative ways. So let's say now if I just hold down a chord, and this will obviously be tempo synced. So if I wanted to, adjust my tempo to be 100 beats a minute, and just come here, and now as I play, we can just have the Apache automatically. So there's going to be different step sizes, and we can think of this as the rhythmic value. So if I say I want it to be eighth notes or quarter notes, now there's some different play order options. So if you wanted to be going up only or down only, Or we could just say, let's make it random. You could also just have kind of inverted ones. You could set the range of tones. So if you want to go over, let's say 2 octaves, I could now just put in my key range is 24. So it'll give you an idea. Now, where a lot of people defaultly will go to like a 16th note or 8th notes, you can also get some really interesting results kind of doing, you know, let's say like a dotted quarter note. So now if I'm just kind of, or let's say dotted 8th note. Or let's say an 8th note triplet. Now, one of the things that was added, I believe maybe version 8 or 7.5, if I'm not mistaken, was this record the output to the track. So now if I just place, let's say if I have a MIDI event here, I could just record directly into the editor itself. So if I just come here. And this way, if I wanted to actually see exactly what I did record with the arpeggio, we can now, the output of the arpeggio itself can be recorded, even though I just held down a simple chord. So at that point, I can just, you know, hold down a simple chord and have it do different arpeggios and record that data. So if I wanted to, let's say, go back to the track, and if we go into like the other version of the Apache, you know, here, you know, we kind of have the same controls, but kind of a different layout. And you could also have, you know, different sequences. But if you haven't really experimented with, you know, doing your arpeggiator, you know, you could do some interesting things like, okay, especially on a MIDI track. So I could take a MIDI track here. Let's just add a, you know, maybe like a Rhodes piano. So I'll just load up a Hallian Sonic SE. And you can do some more creative stuff. Like I want it to have, let's just say keyboard, electric piano. So now I have that sound loaded up and I could play. But what I could do with a MIDI track, and this isn't in an instrument track, it's only one of the differences, is this concept of MIDI sends. So at this point, I could say, let's come up with my arpeggio, and I wanted to send this out to a different device, let's say to my Retrolog. And now I'm going to open up my arpeggiator MIDI plugin. And now I can hold down a chord on the piano, but arpeggiate the synth sound. And this is where you sometimes changing the rhythmic value can be a little more interesting. So now I could just record kind of one part. And have different. So one voice could trigger arpeggios, and you could stack up to 4 different arpeggiators on different parts if you wanted to. So that's some creative uses of the MIDI arpeggiator. So if you're ever kind of stuck for an idea, you can often come up with something pretty interesting using just the Apache 5 or the Apache SX arpeggiator plugins. So if you haven't experimented with the MIDI plugins, definitely give it a try. And again, if you have it as a MIDI insert, once that plugin is turned on, you could just click on the record output to the track, and you just hold down, if your keyboard skills aren't the best, you could just hold down a chord and it will automatically record the arpeggiation as if you played all the parts. So really creative aspect of the program. See, we have some more questions have rolled in, so let me copy those over and then we'll move on. All right, so just copying over some new questions that have come in. Okay, our next question was about using effect sends and panning effect sends. So let's go ahead and open up a project that we can take a look at that. And this is something that a lot of people kind of miss out on. So let's say if we have a project here, and we wanted to be a little more creative with the effects panning or the effects end. And the question also got into how to vary the amount of the effect going directly into that's blended with the dry signal. So let's take a look at first using an effects send. So if I have a effects channel track, I'll just add another one to this project. So let's say if I listen to this, I'm going to have some piano. You stare at the ground, if we listen to just our vocal here, something's wrong. We can't go on. So we're going to have reverb with that. And if I wanted to add an effects end, there's a couple different ways. One is to, at this point, I could just add, you could right click on the track itself. And if you wanted to just add an effects channel track, you can add an effects channel like that, and then select from your plugins. Another way that's very fast and convenient and can save some routing is if you have the sends activated directly here. One thing that you can do is just right click on the send itself and say, okay, I want to add effects channel to send to. And at this point, it'll automatically be routed. So let's say if I wanted to do a little bit of delay at this point, I could just add a stereo delay. And now what we want to do is to just kind of turn that delay on. So let's say if I want it to be, let's say a dotted quarter note delay here. I'll just adjust this value here. So we could have kind of different delay times. And what we want to do on the particular channel to blend the effects, and this may seem basic for some people, but you know, this could be a big stumbling block for others. So as we play this, if I want to send more of this track to the reverb, at this point I could just, and what this is doing is sending more of that track into our reverb effect. And if I want to do the same for the delay, at this point I could just adjust the level. Be someone tonight. So doing this will actually affect how much of the signal is being sent. And we think of this as the level being sent to the effect send. Now, some people can get very creative. And let's say if we just have our reverb here, and let's say if we now, afraid to smile, and I wanted that reverb to be panned independently. So some people get really adamant about that the, you know, reverb, you know, the effects channels and group channels are the same. And I've seen people get really mad about it for some reason I don't understand. But one of the differences is when we go to the panning. So once I have the sends, I could click here. We have our destinations, but I could also click on the panning tab. And this way I could have only the reverb on one channel. When we first met, so if I add more, so this way you could pan the effects ends. How can I feel you? Or if I want to do the delays, so you know it's a stereo effect here. I could say we only want the delay. Or pan it to the left. So at that point, you could pan each of your effect sends independently. So again, if you go to your sends here, destinations, and panning, and this is a great production tip that a lot of people, trick that a lot of people would do. Especially, you know, it was used a lot like in the 80s and early 90s where you had like rock groups with two guitar players. So often one guitar would be in, you know, the two guitar players would be panned into different channels. And at that point, they would put the effect on, you know, if the guitar is panned hard left, the effect or reverb may be in the opposite channel of being panned hard right, and the opposite for the other guitar player to kind of add a bit of cohesion. So you can be a little more creative with panning effects so that, you know, it can work a little bit better overall for your mix. So once again, if we click on your destinations, and someone, I believe the question was a little confused of why this is adding, you know, sending more. So what this is doing is sending that signal directly to the effects return channel. Now, some plugins, when you instantiate them on a, let's say if I come here to add a reverb plugin like RoomWorks, you may have a mix parameter. So generally, if you're running it as an insert, you could think of this as being the mix between wet and dry. And a lot of times, if you're running it as a send where multiple tracks are going to it, you may want to adjust the mix up to 100%. So just a little tip there if you don't feel like you're getting enough signal to the effects return channel. All right, I saw a comment earlier if people could, if I could put my demo projects I use online. There's one or two that I might be able to put online, but most of them I kind of have borrowed from friends. So it probably need their permission to put their projects online. But a lot of times people are kind enough to let me get a demo project that they're working on to use for demonstration purposes. All right. So next question that we had mailed in was someone trying to add note expression data in the score editor, which is kind of a cool thing you could do in Cubase. Let's just open up a project here. Okay, so let's say if I wanted to come here, we have a kind of a Schubert piece, and let's just listen to it here. Now, one of the cool things that you can do if you're not familiar with setting up like different key switches to have, you know, different articulations for different instruments. So let's take a listen to it here. So what we're able to do if we wanted to kind of switch the sound is I could actually double click, and I'll just take this into a larger editor here so we could see it a little easier. And we have different articulations. So this is coming from the Halian Symphonic Orchestra, and we could have different articulations available. So if I solo just this violin one part, so let's say just for that particular, like these 30-second notes, I think they're coming up, I want those to be more spiccato. I could at this point just switch the articulation. Let me just make sure my snap is turned off so I could just switch my articulation to spiccato right there and then back to legato. So this would allow you to do different key switches. So we come here, it's going to switch. And if I want to do something silly like over here, just put it into like pizzicato for this next little phrase. So this allows you to switch between the different articulations, and you can see the articulations listed here. And this carries over into the score editor. So if I wanted to look at this particular event in my score editor, we could see that it's going to add those articulations in for us. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. But let's say if we wanted to, and the question was, how do we enter these in the score editor themselves? So as we wanted to, let's say, look at let's just get a cello part here. And we could actually look at our score editor in the bottom editor zone as well. I'm just going to click here and then click on score. So as we play, so let's say starting at this bar, I wanted it to, we could go to our note expression. So we can see our expression maps here. So if I wanted that to be pizzicato starting right here on the G sharp, at that point, I could just put in pizzicato right there. And then let's say a measure spiccato. and then we could go back to legato. So at this point, everything is just kind of carried over directly into the score editor. So as we wanted to just rewind just a little bit here, we can go from legato. And now to spiccato. So all you have to do to have these carried over is just to select the expression and then just drop that expression in anywhere that you want. And then that will send the key switch so that's going to play back the appropriate mapping, the appropriate samples to match what you wanted to do and to accomplish with that. So once again, just in the score editor, make sure that the expression map is turned on, and then just literally just click below the notes, and then that will automatically send that key switch to play back that style of music within the score editor. Okay, let's go through some of our questions. Okay, so we had a question regarding Groove Agent 4 and the MediaBay and being able to find kits that perhaps were user created. So let's go ahead and do a new project. With Groove Agent 4, the SE4. And we had another question on Groove Agent SE4 as well, or Groove Agent. Okay, so let's say if I just kind of come here to different kicks. Let's say I want that kick, and what I could do is actually just drag and drop to a particular instrument. And I'll just type in snare up top here. We want that as our snare. And I'll just grab this to D1. Okay, so let's say this is our homemade kit. And what we want to do now is to come over here. We're going to save our kit. So if I wanted to at this point, we could just go to the agent itself, and we're going to say save kit as, and we're going to give it a name. So right now, all this September hangout. And if you want, you could put all of your own presets into folder. Okay, so now when I come here, let's see if it's going to show up. So if I wanted to load a kit, we may have to actually just go to, so right now, once I've saved that kit, and just by right clicking, and let's say if I wanted to remove the kit, so at this point I could load the kit, and let's say we called it September 6th Hangout. And now we could just double click, and we have our kick and snare automatically saved. So it was automatically, sorry about that. Let me just, so it was automatically just showing directly up here when I would just choose to do a save kit and then go back to do a load kit. It would just automatically showed up. Now, one thing to make sure is to, one thing that it could be is, the MediaBay will scan particular folders. So if it's not showing up for you, you may want to go into the VST sound, and there's a user content. And this is content that's actually created, by you, the user. Make sure that that is checked, because within there, you would see the, the September 6th Hangout drum kit would show up there. So if that isn't checked in the MediaBay, and again, we could just open up your MediaBay and make sure that, just go to your VST sound, expand that folder, and go down to the bottom and make sure that the user content is clicked. So at that point, it should automatically show up and be updated for you. Now, another question that we had on Groove Agent SE4, I believe, was how to load the kit with the patterns. We could do that independently, but what I like to do is once Groove Agent is open, I just right click, and there's an option here for load kit with patterns. And once that option is turned on, let's say I just want to load up one. It's like forget the past. I'll just double click here. That's going to load up all the kits with all of its associated patterns for you. So now, as soon as I come directly here to this, I can see my patterns that have been loaded that will play back directly with, that are designed for this particular instrument. So that way the two will get kind of loaded up simultaneously. So once you see the agent here, just right click and then choose load kit with patterns. And at that point, you're able to, you can save. And again, if you could load the pattern group independently or save the pattern group, but once you save the kit itself can incorporate the patterns and the sounds, and then you could just load the kit with the patterns just like that. So I hope that helps. If it doesn't make sense, just let me know in the discussion thread. Okay, so I see a quick question that just came up: how to import Pro Tools key commands. So one of the great things in Cubase is the ability to customize it so much where you could change all of your own key commands. And if you wanted to load up key commands from other programs, they're going to be set up where you could just go to your file menu, to key commands, and then under presets, you could see various key command presets from other companies right there. So you could just do your Pro Tools key commands directly there, and or Logic or Sonar. So we made it easy for people to switch, or just, and I find once you there's a certain logic to, and sensibility to the key commands for every program. There's, certain reason that, they're set up. But, if you really take the time to learn, the program, the key commands for, Cubase, it'll really speed up your workflow. So sometimes I know it's muscle memory that's just kind of, ingrained after, years of use, but, sometimes spending a little bit of time learning the key commands can, really speed up your workflow significantly. All right. Okay, so see a comment that the audio from the DAW is a little low, so go ahead and make that louder. We'll see if this is working a little better for people. Really annoying audio to listen to, sorry. All right, so go back through some of our questions that we had sent in. All right, so we had a question, and I'm probably going to do a little more research on this because I don't have about someone that had 3 different Mackie control devices, and they wanted them to all kind of function independently. I don't have 3 different devices that are kind of Mackie control, but I have a friend that does. So I'll spend a little bit of time and see if I could come up with a way to have the 3 Mackie controls kind of act as primary Mackie control. But I just don't have 3 devices to test it with. All right. So we had another question about someone wanting to set up a sidechain delay and how to do that effectively. And this is kind of an interesting production trick. So just go back to this project here. So sometimes people will want delays, but they don't necessarily want the delay to be constantly cascading during the lead vocal, but maybe kind of ringing out a bit when the vocal isn't going on. So let's say if we go back to this little ballad that we had our reverb. You stare at the ground, not a sound. Okay, and let's say we wanted a delay to come in, and a lot of times if we set up a delay, it will often sound something like we heard before. I'll just put a mono delay in. So I'll just right click here, add effects channel to send to, and let's just add a mono delay like so. So, and a problem sometimes can be like a bit of intelligibility. So let's say we have. We can't go on, where the delay is kind of constantly going on and on. So if we don't necessarily want that, and I want the delay to come out when there's no other information on the vocal going on, that's where we could kind of do this little trick. So we'll just set that to no bus. And what I'm going to do is to actually just duplicate this particular track. And on my duplicate track, I'm going to send, let's say we go back to this channel and I want to go to my sends again. And what I want to do is to just send it to my mono delay. And then when we go to edit the mono delay, I'm going to actually activate a sidechain input directly there. And we're going to take this duplicate channel, instead of sending it out to my stereo output, I'm just going to send that directly to the side chain. So now as we play, we're only going to have the delays trigger exactly when the events aren't happening. So let's take a quick listen to the vocal here. We'll just solo the vocals just so you can kind of hear it.
Stared at the ground, not a sound. Tell me why something's wrong. We can't go on.
So when there's no vocal, the delay kicks in. As soon as the signal comes back in, so in context,
How can I see when you want it high from the light? You're someone tonight.
So that's an interesting way of being able to side chain a delay for a lead vocal so that the intelligibility while singing is going on is not affected by the delay, but you hear the delay when the vocal track kind of fades away. So once again, you can just simply select the track, and we're going to basically use the track itself as a sidechain input. And at that point, we're going to, on the duplicated track, we want on the original track, go to the send, and we want that send, like the delay, to be side chained. And at that point, we want to take this track, and instead of sending it to the stereo output, we're just going to feed the output directly into the side chain. So at that point, we have that feeding the sidechain input for the delay. So it's just kind of a clever production trick that people have been using for a long time to have delays kind of cascading, but to not really interfere with the intelligibility of the voice. All right, let's go through some more questions. Okay, so we had a question. Let's see. Is there a way to lock the loop locators when changing host tempo? So let's say if I have a range selection set here, and I have my So I'm just going to set my locators here, and we'll go ahead and activate them. And the one thing that can matter with this, I'm just going to reread the question, make sure I'm understanding it. Okay, so, and the question was, they wanted to keep the locators where they were when adjusting the tempo. So right now our tempo is at 70 some beats a minute. So if I adjust my tempo up, we notice that it's going to be kind of the same timeline. So as we do this, I think it really matters on if the project is set to musical mode. So if we have this set to seconds, and we have you know, you could set the default. Let me just get to the right project again here. Sorry about that. Silly Mac feature. I'm just going to add a marker track here as well so you can see this a little easier. So it could be two separate issues going on here. So generally it can depend on if, so we see that as we adjust kind of, you know, if we have this set to seconds and we adjust, you know, you could have your marker track itself be in musical mode. Let me just see if this is. All right, so this may not be on by default, but if you come here, let's say we have our marker track, you could go to your track control settings. And at this point, there's two hidden ones. So including toggle time base and lock. So if you wanted to, let's say if we go directly back to, and we have, let's say, our markers set to bars and beats, and we don't have this in musical mode, as I adjust the tempo, and let's say if I just placed cycle markers directly there, and as I adjust the tempo, you can see that that's going to change. So you want to make sure that you have this set to musical mode, and then as you adjust the tempo, the markers can stay in the same exact point in time. So again, if you don't see this like on a markers track, just simply right click, and then you could go to track control settings. If you don't see the toggle time base and lock, they may be hidden by default. So we can, if you see these on the left-hand side, you can just add those, and then that functionality will become available so that your marker tracks can be locked, or they could also function directly in musical or linear mode. And this is a question we get a lot on regarding musical and linear mode, where, you know, in musical mode, you know, elements would be placed on the bar in beat position, where linear mode is kind of based on time. So if you change the tempo of something and it's in musical mode, it will still retain its bar in beat position. But if you do that for linear mode, it's going to change, because instead of being in the same bar and beat position, it's going to change based on time. So you could use both of them. Generally, by default, Cubase will work in musical mode. And I think by default, Ondo works the opposite way for people in post-production, where they want to work in linear mode based on time. So that should help with that. So again, check the track control settings and make sure that the marker tracks are in musical mode. And then as you adjust the tempo, all the markers should carry over into the same exact locations. All right, so let's go through, just reading through a couple comments. We had some other questions. Let's go to the next question. Okay, so we had a question. Is a file saved in the Grand under standalone operation that could be imported later into can it be imported later into a track? Let's go ahead and take a quick look. I think I have. I think any of the operations that are going to be saved into Grand might be just a track. It might be just a VST preset. So let me just take a look. I think I have the standalone on here as well. Okay, so I'll just do a quick upright piano to save time here. Okay. So I'll just call this September 6th. Our Grand VST preset. So, and that's going to save, you know, like your different functions of your EQ that you have set up, you know, any ambience, like if we have, you know, different reverbs, you know, your algorithmic or convolution reverb set up. So let's say we have this, and I know it's going through a different audio source, but let's say if I set that, and we'll just call this September 6th verb Grand. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and close out of the Grand here. So it's not going to load up like a traditional program. But if I have the Grand activated, which I think I have here, at this point, if we did everything right, there's my presets that I saved in the standalone version now available directly here to load up in the program itself. So that way, any of the presets that you save can just be loaded up, but it's not going to sequence events. It's not going to, you know, have that's going to be importable. It's just going to allow you to kind of, you know, play the sound in standalone. So if you're doing live performance, it's a great trick for that. But then once again, so once you save the preset, it'll just kind of show up directly here. So if I just wanted to load up that preset, it's going to now have all that information stored directly in. So that's where it would be loaded up. All right. So we had a question just kind of popped up if we have the Hallian Symphonic Orchestra instrument and how does it sound? So we played a little bit of it earlier, but here's the Schubert piece again. I'll just activate this project. And then I'll just revert this. So this is all using the Hallian Symphonic Orchestra. And I'm just running it in Hallian, but you could also run it in Hallian Sonic SE3 that comes with Cubase. So I'll just go to the macro editor here. And one of the things that, is I just did a Q&A video on this morning, is I get this question a lot. Sometimes when people first go to play a particular sound, let's say I have my violin sound here, sometimes it's very low in volume. And this is because instead of using velocity to set volume, we have different expression controllers using the modulation wheel. And you could use other MIDI controllers, and if you wanted to switch it to velocity to control this. So there's a number of different mapping options available, different sample layers here. So you can see, most of the keys will be individually sampled and, very meticulously edited. So, but the cool thing is, once you kind of go to the macro editor, I could now, if I wanted to, just have different level of control. Like for dynamics, I could just, like, let's say my violin one part, I could just hit my modulation wheel on my controller. Then that would bring in, and you could choose to have that automatically fade between the different samples, or to switch. So generally, it's set to fade by default. So as I just come here, you could control the dynamics using the modulation wheel, and you could just kind of watch the modulation wheel just here on the left hand side. So you can get a lot of different expression. And if you wanted to, you could do some really very musical things with this once it's set up, where I wanted to, let's say I have all these set into a folder, and I just wanted to take this piece, and I really haven't done like a lot of tweaking for articulations with this, but just to kind of give you an idea, I could just select all those tracks and use my modulation wheel and control the dynamics. And we can watch the dynamic modulation wheel here. So I could just, using my modulation wheel. And you could just write that information in. And you can go kind of real extreme with that. So that way you could have, like, you could almost conduct the ensemble using your modulation wheel. I know some people, when they're performing, will set it up for an expression pedal, so they can have both hands on the keyboard and be able to, have that level of expression. But the Hagen Symphonic Orchestra, I know a lot of composers kind of use it and get way more use out of it than they ever thought they would. It's a very usable orchestral library, and the price is, I think, standalone by itself is $100, and it's a great, very expressive instrument to dive into, with a lot of the different articulations and expression maps already done for you. So you can see, as you select the different instruments, the articulations are available for the VST expression. So it's a really wonderful addition to any palette of sounds. All right, so just reading through a couple comments. One is, can I show you how to map your MIDI controller for transport? Okay, one other question going back to the grand is that question was, if is that a separate purchase? It is a separate purchase. It comes bundled also within the Absolute 3 collection. But the grand is a really wonderful piano library. Again, you get a Bosendorfer, a Steinway, Yamaha C7, an upright piano, as well as a Yamaha CP80. It's a really phenomenal piano source if you haven't checked it out. All right, so just reading through some of the questions. Right, so just going through some questions, we'll get kind of a sensible order here. Okay, so we saw this kind of in the comments, but for people watching it after, kind of in the ducking with the reverb, someone asked how to do that, similar to what we did earlier with the delay. So let's go ahead and get that set up quickly. We can show you a trick for that. So I'll just revert this. So if you wanted to kind of, let's say not every plugin is going to have a sidechain input. And when that happens, there's another little trick that you can do. And this was mentioned in the comments field as well. But when we want to do this, I'm going to duplicate this track again. So I'm just going to duplicate my vocal track, and on the vocal track itself, I'm going to just do like a really obnoxiously large reverb. So let's come here to, I think I had the reverence used in this case. So I want to just double click here, and let's just do like a huge cathedral. I'll just search for cathedral. Thought I had a reverb with that name in it, maybe not. We'll do a ballroom. So now when you listen to this reverb, it'll be obnoxiously kind of long. Okay, so what we could do in this case, if you have a an effect that doesn't have a sidechain, so let's say if we have this and it's a little too washy, so I'll turn that down to kill, sorry. So at this point, Okay, so what I want to do is go to that reverb return channel. And now at this point, I want to just put a compressor on it. And we'll do fairly heavy compression on it. And we could activate the sidechain. So in essence, our reverb return channel isn't just one, our effect send isn't just one effect. You can have multiple effects stacked in there. So now I want to take this duplicate and feed this duplicate, and this may sound awful because I haven't set it up correctly, but as the sidechain input. So if I did everything correctly, and I'll just adjust my.
Something's wrong. We can't go on living a lie. How can I feel you?
So you kind of hear the effect, and you can obviously tweak it.
You're running high from the light. Be someone tonight.
So that's another method of ducking. Again, what you want to do is you can set up a duplicate track to kind of feed the sidechain input and put the sidechain as a compressor after the effect itself. And then you could do some creative tricks with that. So that's another method. If your plugin doesn't have a sidechain input, a lot of reverbs don't. So that's another method of kind of achieving that same effect. And you could obviously tweak it better than I did in that particular example. But that'll give you an idea of the approach to take. So we have a question: how many acoustic kits and patterns are there in Groove Agent? So let's take a quick look. I think we can actually just do this in the MediaBay. And I'll just set this to Groove Agent SE. So it looks like there's 88 different drum kits that are kind of acoustic based. And obviously there's a number of different great add-ons that are available directly with different expansion packs. Or Steinberg just released like a singer-songwriter. There's great jazz ones. There's Nashville drums. There's also like Simon Phillips has done expansion kits that work in both Groove Agent and Groove Agent SE. So if you're looking for more kits, those are great ways to actually get some new fresh sounds with programming as well as all the processing done for you. Okay, so we have a question on like peak meter versus RMS and how can we see RMS metering. So let's go ahead. There's a couple different ways to do this. So let's just take another example here of project. Let me load up my Cubase again. Sorry about that. All right, let's get this loaded up. All right, so there's different metering types that are available in Cubase. So most of the times, like when you see meters, and there's some different preferences that are available for metering. So if I, one of the things you could actually do is, you know, just change the meter appearance as well as your peak hold time and your fallback. So those are a couple of the different preferences you have. Now, most of the times people will use the meterings. Let's say if I wanted to just go to my bottom editor, you can see meters directly here as well. I'm going to make sure that you guys hear. Just remap this. Okay, it's all set. So you can see kind of like peak meters there. Now, if you want to see RMS, we could do this in the control room. So if you actually kind of go to your control room mixer. So at this point, you could see kind of your RMS and peak meters here. So this will be a full digital scale. And a lot of people kind of place this directly into the right zone. Hopefully we'll see that as an option. I think that's kind of a natural progression of things. You know, so I have this kind of set up in my right zone with a workspace control. So here you could actually see full digital scale, DIN, EBU. So these are different broadcasting standards. But there's also the CAT system 20. So if you wanted to just see what the metering was doing. So if we just wanted to play this particular. I'll just right click to always keep this on top. So these are different broadcast metering standards. Now, the one that's very relevant today is a loudness meter, because there's peak and RMS meters. And when you're doing RMS, is kind of basically, you can think of it almost like the average volume in peaks. You know, we'll show you exactly where, you know, very quickly things are peaking. You know, so there's been a lot of manipulation in broadcast over the years where people will, you know, make different commercials louder. We're very notorious for this, so that they stood out a bit more, and people would manipulate, you know, the RMS to make it overall louder. But now there's kind of a new standard, and there's a loudness meter, or, you know, you could do a full scale loudness, full scale meter here. And this is basically, you could use this as a, you know, just a dedicated arm. You know, it's very, very close to like an RMS meter. And this is a new broadcast standard. And also when you get into different delivery formats, like Spotify has made a big deal recently because they actually switched from their loudness standards. I think there were, you know, they're at -14, I believe, loudness units. So you could actually, and broadcast will be set to -23. So at this point, you could actually adjust kind of your different, broadcast standards here. So, but if you wanted to actually have like, okay, this is my metering for Spotify, you could actually have different presets. So this will give you kind of an idea of where you are for different loudness standards. So if I just want to take this and take my loop off here. So if I was doing this for Spotify, I'd want to make sure that my overall level wouldn't exceed -14 LUFS. Otherwise, people may compress the content to make it fit within the different metering. So, and there are some different metering options here that a lot of people aren't aware of. It's, you kind of see a combination, but you could also, if you just go directly to the meter settings, you could, just hold the peaks, hold it forever, or you could actually have the input meters, the post fader or post panner, all set for different metering options as well. So that way you could set up different metering choices within Cubase. Okay, so we see a question. Can we change the octave when using the chord track? So far, I've only been able to see one chord or one octave. So let me just open up another project here. Okay, so let's say if I have this set up, and I'm just going to show you what you could do with some of the chord pads. So let's say if I have this particular note, and let me just say if we have, just want to make sure we have this set up. All right, so I'm just going to put in a quick chord progression here. All right, that doesn't want to work for me. Let me try another project, or I may have some other chord stuff. Okay, so let's say I just have like this particular chord pattern going on, and just my MIDI controller here. Okay, and I'll turn this up just a bit. So I'm just going to trigger one particular note on my MIDI controller, and that's going to play the chords. And if you wanted to try out different chord voicings, if you actually just kind of go directly, you know, here you could have different patterns, and you could actually, like, I have this set to guitar player, but within the chord track itself, if you come here, you know, you could put in, if you have a chord, if you're only singing kind of one octave, you could just kind of go to piano, and then, you know, there's different options here, which would give you different chord voicings. But I could come here also within the chord pads, and let's say I have this set up, and I could do the same chord, but different voicings by just kind of adjusting. So let's say if I want to go to an A chord, it's going to be different. And these are set up for different guitar voicings. So same chords, but you could experiment with different voicing. So even if you want to do like strings, so at this point, you could just kind of play around with different, and you could choose different players. So if you choose piano player, you could at this point just try, you know, and you can see kind of the voicings for all the different chords. So play around with one, if you're only singing one octave on different chord voices, try to actually, you know, when you, if you have the chord track here, just try different voicings. Make sure that you're not set to basic, you know, try piano, may give you some, a wider variety of chord voicings. And then if you're doing it from the chord pads, you could just kind of go over to the right here, and you have a number of different chord voicing options that will spread across. And then you could also do different tensions as well. So if you have this as a particular, you could also do different tensions. So you want to do like a ninth chord. So if you want to experiment with different kind of modal changes and stuff like that, you're able to do that very easily. So check out and make sure that, you know, if on a chord track you're not set to basic, and then, yeah, try piano, and then, you know, you could actually trigger the different voicings from different keys on your controller as well to try out different chord voices. So experiment with those things. And I think that you'll get more voicing options when using the chord track. All right, so I see a question on incorporating Wavelab. Let me just read the question again here, just real quick. Is it possible to add an additional track to existing stereo track, bypassing Cubase and not having to remix with new track, but mix in Wavelab? So, you know, there's two different editors within Wavelab. One will be the, you know, just the regular editor, and then the other is the montage. So if you have an audio file here, and let's say, you know, if I have this, I could, you know, drag this into a montage if I wanted to. So at this point, you know, if we wanted to start a new montage, and the montage gives you, you know, very flexible editing. So I could actually just say we're gonna do let's say we're doing a 44.1 mix down. And let's just say I have this audio file and I wanted to do some more processing. So within the montage editor itself in Wavelab, you can just simply, if you click on the number, you can add a stereo track above or below. And at this point, you can, just do, I believe the Wavelab elements will do 3 stereo tracks, but the full version of Wavelab is unlimited tracks. So some people will just load up additional tracks. So if you're at the mastering stage and feel you need to do like one little tweak here or add something and don't want to go back into your Cubase project, you could do that quite easily using the montage. Now, something that's convenient for that, if it's just kind of like a file management issue, is let's say if we are particularly here on a project, and let's say if I wanted to do a quick bounce down of a selection. So I'm just going to put my left and right locators just right around this selection here. So I won't do the whole project just to save you time. But one of the cool things that you can do is, and even if I don't have Wavelab open, let's say I close Wavelab, and a lot of people aren't hip to this kind of interchange that I'll show, is there's a function called Wavelab Exchange. So I'm going to take this project, and when I do my export audio mix down, and I'll just do for a couple of bars here, we could choose to have this automatically open into Wavelab Pro 9. So at this point, I'm going to export. Okay, I'm just going to do, my stereo mix down. So now that I exported it, Wavelab is going to start. And then there's my project that came directly from Cubase. So let's say at this point, I'm in Cubase and I have this project closed. So at this point, I could just say I've done my edits, and let's say where I think I could actually fix it in mastering, but I really need to go back and tweak something. I could just say, let's edit the project. And what that's going to do, remember that I closed the project, I could activate the project, and Cubase will now automatically just load directly up in the background for you. So at that point, you could just have Cubase automatically open up and have a direct two-way communication between Cubase and the actual and Wavelab. So if, sometimes if you feel like it's too much of a nuisance to go back and forth, there is a two-way communication where you could actually at that point have Cubase go through and have that direct exchange with Wavelab for you. So we'll go ahead and just get this going here. And then that project can be tweaked in Cubase and then sent back directly to Wavelab. So instead of exporting it directly to a file, then opening that file in Wavelab to do your mastering, everything could be handled directly in that one particular project. So, and then you could tweak it as you see fit. So we'll just get that going. Okay, so we had a question if we could explain the hierarchy of effects for mastering. What effects to use only in stereo out and in what order? This is really different for every project. So some people will always put a limiter last. Some people will do compression on the output stage, and it really depends if you're sending it to mastering or kind of mastering it yourself. can make a big difference. But a lot of times what you want to do for people that want to kind of get it sounding a little more contemporary, or punching a little more, some people will do a touch of EQ, and this is all in, you could have the same album, a project on, on the same recording that doesn't need these effects at all, and some do, so it really depends. Some plugins I would really consider is the frequency EQ. And then the maximizer is very nice as well for dynamics. So if you just come directly here, let's say we wanted to go to, and we could actually just come, the brick wall limiter will generally be last. The maximizer has been updated with a more modern algorithm. And then people, generally in the last slot may use a really high quality, and you have a multi-band, envelope shaper, and, but also just like a brick wall limiter as well. Those are some of the main components that people use in mastering. Some people, don't want to do mastering effects if they're sending it to a mastering engineer, because it's hard to unburn the steak, if you will. But those are, very common plugins that people use in the final stage. And one trick on that's really handy with the frequency EQ is the ability for each band to be one linear phase. So you could click on a linear phase directly below, but you could also, and a lot of times in kind of in the mastering situation, like you may want to increase the vocal a little bit, but not affect the other elements, like maybe a piano or guitar. They're in the same frequency range. So if you come here, you could have independent left, right, but what's really interesting is mid side. So if you actually come, let's say, to my mid range, I could bump just a little bit of my vocal just in the middle part, and it's not mid range tonally, it's the middle part of the panning spectrum. And then you could say, okay, I just wanted to give a little bump of air on the side at those frequencies. So using kind of mid side capabilities is really powerful tool, especially kind of in mastering for for this plugin. So that's a great choice to have, and really kind of use the mid side capabilities. But again, typically what's used is EQ, some maximizing, or brick wall limiter. So you could use a combination of those three, and that will get you, they'll definitely get you a mastered sound. But again, don't, it's really easy to go over the top with stuff and kind of lose all the natural dynamics. Try to be judicious, and if it will go to a mastering engineer later, make sure it's not completely squashed for them, because they are kind of, their hands will be tied. And I hear from my mastering engineer friends all the time that run into that. Yeah. So, and further on that point, the question was asked, if we had an explicit, explanation of what's going on. It really is dependent so much on the source material, and sometimes what you do on one track will be completely different than what you do on the next track. So it's hard to have a use this preset and life will be good kind of answer for that. So it can really vary significantly depending on source material. So plugins that you'd use for a classical piece or like an Americana folk type of piece would be very different than like an EDM track or a hip hop track or a hard rock track or jazz even. So All right, so we had a question how to change the tempo of multi-track audio. So, you know, there's a number of different ways that we could do that. So once you've kind of figured out, you know, what the timing is, you know, a lot of times audio files may be stamped depending if they're recorded with a click track. The audio files are often tempo stamped based on the tempo of what you have recorded. So let's say if I come here, this wasn't recorded with a click track. So what I've done is you want to have a basic reference tempo. So if someone is recorded to the click track, that file, when you go into the pool window, so let's say right now, if I did a new project, and I recorded just an audio track here. And my tempo is 120 beats a minute. When I go to look at that audio file in my pool, we could see that this audio file will have a tempo stamp of 120 beats a minute. So if we just kind of expand it out, you can see tempo. And then there's also a little check for musical mode. So now once we have elements in musical mode, they're automatically set to kind of follow different tempos. So let's say if I have different drum loops or different audio files here. So say I have this drum loop. All right, I drop this in, and let's say I have a bass, and let's say this bass is probably a different tempo. So if I drop that in, so a lot of times, sometimes when you work with loops, they can be automatically tempo synced and placed into musical mode. So if the program sees that, let's say I'm going to start this directly on the bar here, and then both of these, you'll see this little thing called musical mode. So if without musical mode, this is kind of what the files sound like. All right, so if once they're in musical mode, once Cubase kind of knows what the tempo is, at that point, I could now, these will automatically kind of slave to the tempo. So they'll do that. Now, if you don't know, if it wasn't recorded to a click track, that's where it gets to be a little trickier, but Cubase can solve this pretty easily. So let's say I have just a bit like a little jazz piece here. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, so in this piece, let's say we have no correlation and it wasn't recorded to a click track. So if I put on my click track now, there's no correlation between the two. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just select like an overhead drum track. And it could be different tracks. Usually drums work pretty well. And what I'm going to do is just go to my project menu and do tempo detection. And what it's doing is an actual analysis of the drum part to do my tempo of it. So now we can listen to it. And it places everything into, it's breaking it down by beat. So it places everything in 1/4 time. And what I want to do is actually just define kind of the downbeat. So it looks like it's right around here. So I'm just going to zoom in just a little more. And then I'm going to set this to be our 4/4, where our downbeat is. So let's listen to this again. Okay, it's actually looks like it's maybe in between. So I'm just going to set. So we'll just kind of listen to this here. So we've done a tempo map. So now we have tempo changes that are going on every single beat of the project here. And what I want to do, I'm just going to move my tempo track all the way to the top here. And I'm going to do the same with my time signature track. So we know what the tempo is on every single beat, and we're assuming since all the musicians play together that it's pretty consistent throughout. So what I want to do is to select all of the files here. And what I want to do is, instead of applying a static tempo value, I want to apply the different tempo changes for every single beat as metadata in a file. And I can do this from going to my audio to advanced, and I'm going to say set definition from tempo. And I could apply this in the project or store it as metadata in the files itself. And then what that's doing is applying the tempo changes of every single beat of every single audio file as metadata. So I'll take just a second here. So now I could just change the tempo on the fly. So as I just come here, I could say, let's just make it 100, a fixed tempo of 130 beats a minute. And I can see my original tempo here versus my fixed tempo. If I want that to be 144. So at that point, you could also just kind of enable the tempo map. And if it's like a little too fast or a little too slow, you could actually just adjust the tempo, but keep the tempo changes. Or if you wanted to speed up, you could adjust the tempo like that. Or even if you wanted to have that automatically, just kind of, if we go to the center, we could kind of make the tempo a little tighter so it's not as spread out. So these different things that you can do to the tempo to just kind of change an entire multi-track in just a matter of seconds. So just I just want that to speed up to go to right there. And we'll jump forward a little bit here. So as you jump to different parts, you can just graphically change the tempo. And it's really super fast and easy to do inside of Cubase. That works for, you know, such a wide variety of musical scenarios where the band recorded without a click, and maybe it's a great take, but they sped up or something happened tempo wise after a drum fill. You could just fix it really easily. All right, so we see a question: how to record audio in Cubase from system applications or YouTube, for instance. A lot of times, some of the audio interfaces, Cubase doesn't use the standard Windows driver because, there could be a lot of issues with latency and clocking. But, depending on the audio interface that you have, you may be able to do the Windows sounds and Cubase sounds and route the audio. It really depends on the audio interface driver if you can do that internal routing. But, a lot of people will just, extract the audio from the video. A lot of people will also just simply, take the audio output of the onboard audio interface and patch it directly into a higher quality converter. So, but, it's really dependent upon the audio interface of if it does routing like that. So on a Mac, you could set up different like aggregate devices, but a lot of times it's not. Most of the audio interfaces aren't set up that way to record directly in, but you could easily extract. I think if you go, one website, I think Teddy Riley showed me once, is YouTube to MP3, where you just punch in the YouTube link, it'll automatically give you an MP3, and sometimes stuff like that works faster and easier. Okay, so question: while in recording mode, is it possible for a musician to hear himself in monitor mode and hear the recording playback on the same channel as well? And this could really be dependent upon like the software monitoring. Sometimes the software mixers for audio interfaces will allow you to do this through internal routing, but you could also kind of play around with I know some people will set it up to do like a listen bus. One of the preferences that a lot of people miss is just on the VST connection. So, or if you go to VST and under monitoring, a lot of people have it set to manual. So you could have this also set up for tape machine style, which is probably the most common method that people use. Once they figure that out, they want to kind of stay in tape machine style. But sometimes people will also just send out the signal using a QMix for monitoring. So at this point, if you have a QMix enabled, they could hear themselves off of the QMix, and you could monitor that. And for getting your QMixes set up, what you want to do is in the racks, and you can do this in the full mixer view, make sure that you have the Q sends turned on. And as soon as the Q sends, let me just go to my configurations, and I'll just hide my input channels here. So you can see your Qs here. And then what you're able to do is to literally just kind of take all the tracks in your project like so. And if you have the control room active, so let's say we just kind of come right over here, we'll activate the right zone. You can see like I have like vocal, guitar, bass, drums, and I have these set up within my VST connections. So if you just kind of go to your setup here, you could also just go to your VST connections or go to hit F4. And once you have the VST connections, you can go to the studio tab, and you could route like your vocal, guitar, bass, drums, and you could name these whatever you want to different outputs on your audio interface. And then at that point, to get these set up, you could right click and just say, I want to take all my Q sends. And first you could activate the Q sends. And then again, just right click. And we're going to use our current mix levels. So that will copy over our mixer settings directly to those channels. And for all the cues, I want to use the current pan settings. So at this point, you know, you could have them monitor directly from the cue mixes as well, and you could set it up for that as well. But play around with some of the different monitoring preferences if you haven't done that, and try, you know, playing around with the you know, with tape machine style monitoring. I think that could help as well, maybe get you where you want to go. All right, so we had a question, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, how to map a MIDI controller for transport. And this could often be done. A lot of MIDI controllers will work under like a Mackie control device. So if that's a capability, someone will do Mackie control just for transport. You can click on the plus sign here, and then at that point, just add like a Mackie control, and you could do a lot of your transport functionality directly from there. Now, as we're working with this also, if it doesn't conform to Mackie control, if you have it set for Mackie control, the one thing that you want to do is to, once it's enabled, is tell it what MIDI ports that it's going through. So I will go ahead and get rid of that. But there's also, if it doesn't like follow a Mackie control protocol, you can come here and just have it do what's called a generic MIDI remote. And what this will allow you to do is you could take all your different, you set the MIDI inputs where your controller is set up. At this point, you can say this MIDI information, and what you could do, if you don't know what MIDI, you can think of this is the MIDI message at the top that's coming in, and I want it to control this function in the bottom. And if you don't know what MIDI message a particular device is spitting out, you could actually just kind of click on learn and hit the button or move a knob. And at this point, you could just say, we're going to learn that MIDI message, and we want to assign that MIDI message here to transport. And I want it to be a transport device, and I want this to be, you know, start, stop, whatever of your transport functions are enabled directly there within the system. So that's an easy way to set up your controller. You can do that for the 5 or 6 buttons or however many MIDI controls that you want for your transport. You just set it up in your generic remote, and you could get very fancy with generic MIDI control as well. Like I saw a question on one of the Cubase groups, I think from Peter Rad, who had asked if there was a way to do like the straighten pitch in the Very Audio editor using a MIDI control. And you could actually do that, you know, by going into Command, and then if you wanted to go into Sample Editor, so you could say, I want this knob to just do my Very Audio quantized pitch. And then you could set up a generic remote control to do that. So if you have like a controller that has like, you know, some extra knobs and functions you aren't using, you can have those assigned to do very specific tasks within inside of Cubase by going to the generic remote. And again, you could add a generic remote by clicking on the plus sign and selecting generic remote, and then make sure that's assigned directly here. And then you could have it do, you know, thousands of different functions inside of Cubase. So I see a question, does Halion SE3 limit your options? I think this is maybe with using the Halion Symphonic Orchestra. No, it's basically you don't have like, you know, as much editing capabilities for, you know, placing different sounds, but for playing back and all those controls, you could do the same functionality directly in Hallion Sonic SE3 for the Hallion Symphonic Orchestra and other instruments. So you think of the Hallion Sonic SE3 as just kind of like the playback engine that, you know, Hallion 6 is, yeah, was based upon the engine from Hallion 6. So a lot of content that works in Hallion will work in Hallion Sonic SE because that gives us such a huge audience of Cubase users available to have access to for the libraries. Just reading through some of the comments. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. All right, just reading through some comments here. Okay, so we had a question on a quick explanation on the envelope shaper and why to use it. The envelope shaper is really pretty phenomenal for drums. We'll give you kind of an idea here. Not the file I want it, but let me just see if I have another one. Just switched computers recently, so don't have every single file that I used to. All right, I'll just do a different one. So the envelope shaper is like really ideal for drums and kind of making drums a little more easier to work with and get a bigger, huge sound. So let's do a new project. All right, so let's say if we have our pattern here. Just adjust our tempo down here a little bit. All right, so we'll try to give you an idea kind of what the envelope shaper can do to your drums. You can find this under Dynamics. So if you want like more attack or less attack. So it allows you to basically take the almost like the ADSR of an audio file. If you want to be very tight. And again, if you want to bypass. So even without level changes, can make your drum sound much larger. So before and after. And a lot of people use it almost strictly on drums, but on bass, I've seen some people put it on a master fader for their entire mix and have it sound phenomenal. So it's a great tool for allowing you to, be able to edit, the basic, think of it like an ADSR, like your amplitude, your attack, and make it sound brighter, longer, what a lot of people spend hours trying to tweak a compressor to do. You could do this in just, a matter of seconds with the envelope shaper. And not only is it a standalone plugin, but you could also get it directly in the channel strip. So as soon as you go to tools, you could have not only a de-esser, but your envelope shaper is going to be using the same algorithm there. So great plugin. Just reading through some of your questions. Okay, so I'm seeing a question about the UR28M and how does the loopback function work? That will allow you to record the audio directly back into the system, but it doesn't necessarily work in conjunction when using it as an ASIO driver. So the loopback function of the UR28M is a function. So if you're like playing a game, and what you're able to do is to basically send the audio directly back into the system to record like the game audio for broadcasting or for doing like hangouts like this. That will allow you to take the signal, but it doesn't necessarily allow you to have that signal work at the same time as you're doing everything in recording it in Cubase, because it's kind of using two different driver architectures. Okay, so I see a question. Someone wanted to know how to move a chord within the MIDI editor to keep it from going, let's say, from an A flat major 7 to B flat minor 7. I'm just going to reread this. Okay, so I think question was how to keep the scale, if when transposing MIDI, to keep it within the scale. So let's say if I just have a MIDI track here. So let's say if I want it to be, here, let me just do a quick. All right, so say I just have like a piano sample loaded up here. Let's just remove these 2 tracks. Okay, so if we have, let's say a G chord, and we wanted to transpose that but keep it within the key. So at this point, I think if we just go to your MIDI, let's get to your transpose setup. And this way I can say we're going to keep it to G major. So now when I have those selected, we go to our MIDI and you get to your transpose setup, and you can say you want to go down 2 semitones. At that point, it'll still keep everything within the scale correction. So what you want to do is, again, go to your MIDI and go to your transpose setup. And at that point, just click your scale correction and then define your key. And then you should be all set with that. Okay, just reading through some of the other questions real quick. Sorry for delay. Okay, so someone asked about how to record from one track to another track and how to do that. So this could be a little, it's not as obvious. So say if I want to take this track here. Okay, so what we could do, there's two different approaches. One is I could just take my VST connections and I can make up just a fake bus here. So not connected, we'll say stereo out to. And at this point, I could just add, let's say, another stereo track. And then in this track, I could just say, let's take the send. And we're going to send it out to stereo track 2. This track, the input is coming from stereo out 2. So as I hit play and record here, let's say I hit record. So at that point, you could just bus it internally like that. So that's one way of doing it. Another way, and the reverb you heard is just coming from my audio interface. Let me just turn the reverb routing all the way down here. And now, so that's one way of doing it very easily. You could also set it to, if I wanted to route it to a group channel. So if I have a number of channels being fed to a group channel, at that point, I could also route this. I'll add another audio track here. So I want to take the stereo out track there. I want to take this channel, take the original channel here. I'm just going to erase this recording that we just did here. And in my sends again, I could send this directly to the fake stereo output, again with nothing, to a group with no, so you don't have to have it physically routed. At this point, I'm going to take this track's input from the stereo out to this input from the group. And then as I play, I could have both these armed and just record. Internally, just like that. So that's how you could do some routing. So you could create kind of a phantom or empty group or an output. And if you don't have the physical outputs, it's no problem. It will just kind of internally route it so that you could have your routing done that way. So it's not the most intuitive thing, but once you do it once or twice, it's really easy to get set up. Okay, so see a question. I have audio guitar tracks that I will edit out a bad note or two. Since these tracks are song length, I cut the parts. I cut the parts using the magnetic cursor, isolating the error. Is there a way better than delete the small segments? Is there a quick mute that I can use to see if this is worth deleting first? So let's say if I just wanted to come here and just, in this example, you could just kind of select the range. So I'm just going to turn off my cursor here. Then let me just colorize this so it's a little easier to see. So what I do kind of in that scenario, a lot of times, if you wanted to just kind of check. I think if you just grab the range selection tool and then hit Shift X, that will automatically split that range and just kind of navigate to the mute tool and do it just kind of like that. And you could make macros to kind of automatically do that as well. So, if you wanted to, so again, kind of using the range selection tool, just say, okay, I want to do that. So Shift plus X will do that. And then if you wanted to, hit 7 and just mute the selected event, you could create a macro to do that. And then you can mute it before deleting it. And at that point, you could listen to it without having to worry that you just, didn't erase the wrong note. Okay, so I see a question, is there a way to hit the right automation dot? Because sometimes it seems like a struggle. All right, so let's say if I come here and I have a couple like automation points. Okay, so one of the things you could do is if you just have the automation dot selected, you can use the left and right arrow to navigate. So let's say if I wanted to take that automation dot, if you hold down the Shift key, you can just simply select multiple navigation points. And then if you wanted to raise or lower the automation, you could do that. So if you hit Shift and then the left arrow, you can just navigate back or go backwards from that point. So Shift right arrow, Shift left arrow. So as soon as, and again, you could just hit the left and right arrows to navigate between the different automation dots. Now you can say, I just want to take that and adjust the automation points just like that. So let me know if that works for you. I think that works pretty well once you kind of get used to it. Okay, so I see question in a project, someone has done a lot of routing and sidechaining. Does Cubase provide a way to visualize the routing and sidechaining in a diagram or something like that? Not really, but one thing that a lot of people don't know is, let's say if I have this particular channel and let me just create some sidechaining and stuff like that here on this particular project. And we'll have this channel feed the side chain. Okay, so once you're in the channel view of Cubase, one thing that a lot of people don't know is, let's say if I'm here, if you click here, you could actually see where all the outputs are for the selected channel. So I can say that this is going to stereo out to the stereo out. It's also targeting the stereo out to and group 1. And let's say, and I could kind of do this on my input as well. So let's say if I will come back to this, so I could see kind of my targets here, and I could see what my input is just on this side as well. So here you could, not only set the input, so you could actually kind of see, your different routing scenarios here. So you can see your input sources as well as your targets. It's not necessarily a diagram, and let me just see if the side chaining shows up here. So let me just add in our audio track. And let me just activate side chaining. On that. So now this, I can see that this channel is feeding my stereo out, my left, right, my groups, and my side chains. But let's say I add a number of different channels. If I go to let's say if I now just go to my targets, let me just show you this here. Sorry, it's a little chaotic. I could now just say, okay, I want to go to this target. And now I can see that takes me to that side chain. And this is being fed by two sources. And I can say, I want this to be my mono in. And again, I can say this channel. And this one was going out to our groups, I believe. So if I do my send here, let's say I send this out to the group as well. So at this point, I can say, oh, I just want to go directly to group one. Then I could go to group one and see what sources are feeding it. So I can say, okay, let's go to this particular channel. And then I can see that channel is feeding these three sources. And there's two different input sources from here. So each channel, while it doesn't give you a diagram, can show you what's feeding it and where it's going out of with these little arrows just pointing to the left and to the right. So if you're like ever stuck and it's like, what is feeding this side chain? You could just determine that, you can go to that particular channel. Like we have a side chain on, I think, on this. So that's where our side chain was. And sorry about that. So I could look at that side chain and say, okay, there's three different sources that's coming from audio one, and audio one is going, to your different sources. So play around with that. And while it's not a diagram, it can give you a path to show you exactly where all of your parts are going in and going out. Okay, just read through a couple comments here, some other questions. Okay, so we had a question on setting up, someone was having difficulty setting up a surround mix and how to approach that. So I'm going to come here. And first thing you want to do is to make sure that in your VST connections that we have a surround output. So I'm going to just come here and add a 5.1 bus. And now that we have this audio channel, I want to send it instead of to a stereo out to my 5.1 out. And now once I get to my channel, we can see that we can have our panner here immediately turns to a 5.1 panner. And now we can take like this stereo track and feed it directly within our surround panner, like so. Now, a couple little tips. Sometimes, like if you're composing for film, you know, you generally stay out of the center channel because that's where dialogue lives. So you could actually just hold down your Alt key and you could bypass that channel entirely. So, and there's, you know, all sorts of different surround panning options that you have available here. But you want to, you know, firstly, I don't think firstly is a word, sorry. But at first, define in the VST connections all of the a 5.1 output. And you want these probably an audio interface that has 6 outs and route those to the appropriate speakers. And once you have this set up, and if there's also some really clever things. If you have it set up as the first bus here, then this could also tie directly into your control room. So now if you wanted to go to your control room mixer, at this point, your control room can now be in, so you could have your different monitor setup. So in my studio, I have a 5.1 set up, and I have my 5.1 speakers. I have my main stereo speakers, like stereo monitors, and then I have the left and right of my 5.1, and my center channel is a mono. And I could actually just kind of down mix directly from there. But you could have different down mix presets. So you can say, here's I want to monitor it in 5.1. And then you can say, how is this going to unfold? How is this going to fold down to stereo or to mono for someone listening on a phone, watching a movie? So you could just simply do your down mix presets there. And here you actually have a 5.1 volume knob in the control room as well. So you could have, you know, your combination of monitors and different speakers and down mix presets. But once that is set up, your 5.1 output, at that point, you know, all of your channels that are routed to the 5.1 output will immediately show up here within your surround panner. And you could also just double click within your surround panner. And if you wanted to send more, you know, to, you know, you could do different rotations. You could also send more of the channels to your LFE or more to the front. You could adjust kind of your front rear, you know, dispersion. You know, if you want the rear to be a little bit wider, if you wanted to adjust width or depth. So all these, you know, I want to send more to the channel. So, you know, different functions that you could do directly here within the multi-panner. So you could do quite a bit within the multi-panner here in Cubase for setting up 5.1. And I love mixing in 5.1. It's, you know, it's a shame that it's really hard for people to have a playback system that's effectively monitoring it, but it just gives you so much freedom to place things without kind of fighting for sonic real estate. So if you get a chance to experiment with 5.1, do it. It's just a lot of fun. Okay, so I had a question on disabling MIDI tracks in 9, if that the MIDI input is still working. Let me just... Okay, so I'm just going to try this out. So I'll just add an instrument track here. I haven't tried this yet, but I'm going to first, I'll go back and make sure you guys can hear. I'll just go back to my VST connections and I'll just make it a stereo. Okay, so we have let's say our VST instrument here, going to retrolog. And let me just check my control room, make sure I didn't out clever myself here. Okay, so I have MIDI going out to it. I'm going to right click to disable the track. Okay, so now it's not taking any CPU cycles. And now we will enable the track. And let's open it up, the instrument, and see if it's getting, yep, so it's getting MIDI. So that seems to be working. So I'm not sure if that's, if you had it set up differently, but that seems to be getting MIDI in now. So. So just a couple comments about, a lot of hopping to see the side chains. I think once you, it wasn't, if I had a project prepared, it would be kind of easy to navigate. So, but I think once you just kind of click, you could actually just go directly to the channel where the side chains are active. So I think if you play around with it and that it won't look as chaotic as when I was doing it kind of off the, and adding different elements midway through. But I think once so you can basically from any source, go to any source that's feeding it or to any destination source where that track is going out. So once you kind of do that, I think it'll make sense. But I just didn't have a project organized as well as I thought, and probably getting lost a bit myself. So. Okay, so seeing a question, is there a way to gang controls for multiple instances of the same plugin in a track? I'd like to use 3 stereo plugins together on one virtual surround compatible plugin. A lot of times, I'm not sure if you're, if you're working in surround, most of the times when you add a plugin, let's say if I added an effects channel track, you could actually just come directly here and say when you wanted to put the reverb in, that it's in 5.1. Now, if you're kind of doing like a fake surround to give depth, you could probably just do that directly through quick controls in the mixer. So let me just do a new project here. And just reread the question, make sure. Okay, so let's give this a try. I've never tried this, but we'll just say simple compressor. The one thing I could think of is maybe, and this may work across different tracks as opposed to the same one, but we'll give it a shot in our mix console. So we have our 3 separate compressors. I don't know of a way to do 3 at the same time. I think you could do 3. Let me just. Yeah, I don't know a way to link 3 on the same channel. I think I could link 3 different channels, but that's, I don't think, what you want from your question. But I'll kind of play around with that. It's an interesting question. See if I can come up with some macro or something to make that work. Okay, so getting back to the automation, there's another question based on that. So let's say of how to see the value of the automation. So let's say we have this. One way is to just come here, and you see it on the info line that you could just adjust the value here. So if you have the info line activated, if you don't have the info line, I think if you just come to the Windows setup, or just at this point, you could just make sure that if you click just to the right of these 3 icons, you could actually just get this and make sure that the info line is selected. So as soon as you have that actual info line, event selected, you could just use your mouse scroll wheel directly here, or type in a value and say, -10 or -12, boom, and be able to enter the exact value in that way. So, and you could also kind of do this for multiply selected events. You could increase or decrease just using your mouse scroll wheel like that as well. Okay, so we have a question. How do you set up stem record tracks? I'm having trouble with outputs or direct outputs. One easy way of doing it is, let me just come here to, let's see, I have a project that'll make sense. I think this one will work. You know, you could assign it to groups and set the groups as a real-time input. But what a lot of people do, you know, and we see this with film composers that, you know, we print stems constantly. And one of the features that we gave them was the ability to just kind of do, instead of printing the stem, and kind of taking a different approach and just doing the batch export. So if I come here, I could actually just go to my export audio mixdown. And then at this point, I could just say, I want to take my output channels. I wanted to take all of my group channels. So if you have things kind of organized, and you can see like in this project, my friend Clay, he organized it pretty well. So I could see like my groove agent group, my drum, snare, you know, my toms, congas, bass, piano, keyboards, guitars, vocals. I could take all of my effects channels, and I could take all of the different audio channels if I wanted to, you know, all of my VST instruments, my MIDI tracks. And then at that point, you could just choose to do an export and export it directly into the project itself. So, you know, just like we showed earlier with taking it to an output and taking the output as an input, or taking the group, routing it to a group and sending the group to an input, we could just simply just do a batch export. And, you know, it's often faster than real time. And, you know, just checking import into project as an audio track, you know, we'll just place it sample accurately directly back into your timeline. So at that point, you know, that may be a better approach for some people. Some people may just want to print stems, as you know, especially if they're going to external processing gear. You could do that as well. But you know, if you're having problems, just try the batch export. And again, once you go to the file menu to the export audio mixdown, so just go to export to audio mixdown, and at that point, just make sure that you have the batch export selected. And I think once you kind of get set up for that and your projects are set up, you could have that work very quickly for you. Okay, so I'm going to see a question. What would be the best way to record the computer output inside Cubase? On Mac, use Soundflower app to do it. What would be the best way to do the same with PC computer? I think that there is an equivalent. I could do some research if you want to email me on at clubcubase at steinberg.net. I could do some more research on it, but I forget what it is off the top of my head, but it had some, I forget what the name of it is, but there is kind of an equivalent. All right, so I see a comment. Wish there was a stereo down mix option when working in 5.1. There is. So if we have your 5.1 output, it would just it's under your control room mixer, and you just go to your down mix. And if you have 5.1, you'll see the down mix presets. So if it's 5.1, you can go to stereo to mono, stereo to 5-1. So just within the down mix presets there. Seeing a comment on the batch export. If you don't want it to include the master bus processing, you could just simply disable it before you do it and then turn it back on. So it's just one mouse click to do. So that's kind of an easy way to get that. So if that's an issue, you can just simply bypass the master effects processing, just, bypass the inserts. And if you want a quick way to, bypass like the inserts, if you hold down, I think it's the Alt key, maybe the Command key, just Shift key, one of them. But you could just, like, on the channel strip, you could just come here. Let's say if you have the EQ, you could just, let me get the right modifier key here. You can bypass, I forget what you can reset it, or you could just bypass here. So 2 mouse clicks, and you could actually have a keyboard shortcut to do bypass, but I don't think for resetting. All right, I'm going to take a quick look back. I think we probably had some other questions that were submitted earlier. All right, so I see a question. Since upgrading to 9, the presets for the logical editor and loop mash are missing. How do I get them back? And I think this is on, I believe it was on Mac, but if you go to your Finder, sorry, let me just jump back here. And what you want to do is to go to the library. And if you don't see the library, just hold down, go to Go, and then hold down the Alt or Option key and library. And then at this point, I think it's under Preferences. Excuse me. You'll see Cubase 9. And then in here, you'll see presets. And then probably what you want to do is to be able just to drag. So you see, like, these are the presets for Cubase 9. You'll have a presets for Cubase 8. Try dragging the Cubase 8 ones directly over to Cubase 9. And that should do the trick for you. Okay, so I see a question. I want to be able to experience a vocoder live while talking, singing, instead of just vocoding a vocal track I've recorded. This sounds like it might be an issue of direct monitoring being turned on. So if you go to your device menu, and depending on your platform and audio interface, if you go to the device setup, this could be handled by a control panel applet, or it could be handled in the system. But it sounds like maybe direct monitoring is turned on. So you see this when you select audio interface. Make sure that you don't have direct monitoring turned on, because what direct monitoring allows you to do is to pass the signal directly from the input to the output for monitoring, but it doesn't go through any of the software effects. So if you had a compressor or a reverb or a vocoder, you wouldn't hear that if direct monitoring is turned on. But if you turn the direct monitoring off, I think that will do the trick for you. So give that a try and let us know how it works out. right, just a couple last minute questions. All right, let me just see. All right, so the missing presets question on PC, it would, if you go to your start menu, and then take a look at the and or go to the Windows menu, then go to the you'll see like the program files, you'll see the Steinberg, and then you'll see like it's called like where you'd go to launch the program from the Windows menu at the bottom left corner. I'll just get the correct term for you. And if you look at the program list on the left hand side, and then click on like Steinberg Cubase 8, and then you'll see a thing called a user settings data folder on the left hand side. Don't launch the program, but just kind of open up the program folder on the left hand side and then copy the presets from the user settings data folder. If you have problems with that, just email me and I can send you a screenshot of where to access that. Oh, that's the one I remembered when someone was asking about the cable, the software routing cable. It's a virtual audio cable. Someone added the comment in, but for people watching it afterwards, the virtual audio cable was recommended. Okay, so see question, what port do you use on the PSP? Or I'm sorry, the PSR E333 Yamaha keyboard to connect to a new MacBook Pro to record. I believe it has a USB output, so you'd probably need to get a USB-C to USB adapter. So Apple sells them. I just got a new MacBook Pro with the Touch Bar. So I've spent like $180 on adapters, for USB ports and for Ethernet. So you'd probably have to get, if it has a direct USB connection on the PSR, you could connect it that way with the Ethernet adapter. If it doesn't, you could get a USB MIDI interface and connect it to that, and connect that USB to the USB-C to like a USB traditional, like USB A or B, I forget which one it is, but a traditional MIDI or traditional USB port. But you'd need the adapter because the new MacBook Pros only have the USB-C ports. All right, so we've gone about a little over 3 hours. We'll see if there's any last minute quick questions. If not, we'll wrap up because I'm going to go pick up my son from school. If you have a quick last minute question, just pipe in, let us know. I hope that everyone has learned a couple tips or tricks. I want to thank everyone for participating and for asking all wonderful questions. I hope everyone's learned something. We'll be doing another one. We should have the date if you want to check the comments field. Maybe in the next couple of days, we'll have the date picked out for the next Hangout, but it should be maybe the week of September 25th-ish. So we'll see if there's last quick questions coming in. If not, we'll wrap up. So I'm seeing just the comments about the VST Connect Pro. We could have that one set up for the next one. We are planning on getting a video tutorial done on that. So I see a comment on 9.5 new features. I don't know what it is because 9.5 isn't out. All right, we'll just wait one more minute. If not, we'll wrap up. And again, thank you to everyone. I really enjoyed doing the Hangouts and hope it's helpful for people. We had a lot of people online today. So once again, I hope everyone's learned some tips and tricks, and look forward to seeing you guys on the next Hangout. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. And again, thank you so much. If you have questions that you want for future Hangouts, please send them to clubcubase@steinberg.net. And if someone would be gracious and kind enough to do an index for all the different questions so people could just navigate quickly to a particular topic, that would be so appreciated for everyone in the community. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up, and thank you so much, and have a great evening, a great afternoon, or wherever you're at. Take care.